Is this one where we have to let people in or?
Yeah, so we have people coming into the webinar. Hello, everyone. We'll just wait just a moment while everybody comes in.
Perfect. We'll get started in just a couple more minutes. We'll have a few people joining.
All right, it looks like people joining the webinar has finally slowed down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll
Perfect.
pass this off to Kayla. She's going to start us today.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on direct and indirect measures for your students' learning outcomes. My name is Kayla Voss. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Growth and Engagement here at Peregrine Global Services. And today I am with my colleague Desiree Moore, who is our Director of Marketing and Strategic Growth. I'd like to start with a quote from W.E. Deming. You can imagine that you can't manage what you don't measure. To me, this is a very powerful and truthful quote. W.E. Deming is considered by many to be the founding guru of continuous improvement. His plan, do, check, act, or the PDCA cycle is used by businesses and non-business entities across the globe. Before we dig into this a little bit deeper into the ins and outs of assessments, I think it is helpful to define assessment. Assessment is a systematic collection, review, and use of information about educational programs undertaken for the purpose of improving student learning and development. During our discussion today, we will be talking mostly about assessment practices within continuous quality improvement processes, including how direct and indirect measures of student learning. Methods can be used for both the indirect and direct measures, and why giving grades is not adequate for the assurance of learning. Although there are many approaches to establishing a process, I do think that Deming's PDCA is a great place to start. You can see this as a circle or a loop. I'm not sure you are familiar with this tool, but they have been used by businesses and industries in one form or another for many decades for that quality improvement. Now, what I have here is a process that has been adapted for higher education institutes and looking at learning outcomes. We start with the plan, which is objective of your learning outcomes. Then collecting the data, which is the do part of the process. Then analyzing your data, and analyzing and sharing your data and results is the study part of the Deming cycle. As we act, which is closing of the loop and making changes. I will often use this as a starting point to look at processes for the continuous improvement of our student learning outcomes. Now I'd like to cover a little bit of the difference between formative and summative assessments. Some people are unclear what the difference is, and it simply is course versus program level assessments. So your course level or formative is very important for each faculty person or instructor so that they can evaluate the learning of their course at that course level. It helps students understand where they stand within a course, and it's used to improve teaching. For example, I would find through formative assessment that my students are struggling with a concept or skill, and then I would look at how that particular thing can be covered in my course, make adjustments to improve that student learning outcome. As where program or summative level usually happens at the end of the actual program, and it is accommodating the entire program, and it's used to improve the program. This can include a pre, where they take it when they begin the program, and a post test where they take it at the end. That can be added to demonstrate the value of the program and measure that there was integrated and retained knowledge throughout the program. Recently, I worked with a school that found their students were not retaining knowledge in macroeconomics. Well, after they went back and looked at their program and assessed it, they were teaching macro at the beginning of the program, but then it wasn't taught or sprinkled in throughout the rest of the program. So once they figured out that, because students 4 years later were not remembering that information, they were then able to go in, sprinkle it throughout the program, and then that increased their results on their post-test. So now we are going to ask you a poll question. So how well documented and efficient are your assessment processes? So Desiree is going to go ahead and launch that.
So if you could just respond in the chat box, we're actually having some trouble with polls today, and I don't see the option to launch the poll, which we normally have.
It's going to let me launch it, Desiree.
Oh, it'll let you launch? Okay.
Yep.
Kayla's in charge of polls today.
I will launch that. Okay, do you guys see that?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Kayla.
Okay, perfect. Yep. So we'll give everyone just a minute to respond. We're almost there. Thank you for participating. Okay. Gives everyone 15 more seconds. Good. All right, I am going to end the poll. And do you want me to share the results now?
Yes, let's see those. I'm curious.
All right, do you see them?
Yes, well, that's really interesting. Okay, so 59% of you say that your assessment process is well developed. Great job. We know that that is quite the feat. And then sort of, you know, I was expecting to see more schools actually in this area just because it is such a feat. So I'm feeling very optimistic about the yes, but of course 35% said, you know, we still need some work. And then no, we intend on developing it, but are not there. And that does happen, especially over the last several years. Outcomes-based education has just become more popular over time and more important. And so a lot of schools are still figuring out their assessment process as they transition to outcomes-based assessment and learning. And so that is okay. We can go ahead and close that. Okay, thank you, Kayla, for introducing us to the subject of assessment. And the reason we opened up with assessment, because as you saw, the title of this webinar was direct and indirect measures, right? Well, before we even get to really, you know, what are the differences between direct and indirect? What are some best practices for those? Where are we using those measures? Well, we're using them in assessments, right? And so, of course, we need to introduce you to assessments. And then also we need to establish goals and outcomes before we even measure anything, because what are we measuring? So there are two types of learning goals or within a higher education institution. You are probably very familiar with these, but there's learning versus operational. So learning goals are going to be broad. Learning outcomes, there are many skills that need to be learned, right? And so those are going to be mostly based on what a student is learning. Operational goals are going to focus on managing and supporting business activities that enable the institution or academic unit to thrive. So maybe that is a goal around streamlining your admission process, or a goal around how transcripts come into your institution, something related to that. And then objectives underneath goals, indicate specific learning outcomes, which is derived from both the institutional level or the college school level, like if you have a school of business, departmental, program, and course level goals or learning outcomes. And then some of the operational objectives or goals that we're talking about are going to be more tied to your strategic plan. Of course, learning and student learning is a key tenet of your strategic plan. It's tied to your mission and your vision and your values as an organization, as an institution. But as you're looking at your strategic plan and you're saying, how do we get there? How do we enhance the student experience? How do we provide the best learning environment possible? Those operational goals are going to heavily influence that. So let's talk about a learning goal. Learning goals are the product of faculty reflection on skills, attitudes, and knowledge that they expect students to learn as a result of matriculating through an institution's program. They are the roadmap for the curriculum and are the foundation on which the assessment program is built. However, learning goals are really broad and not sufficiently specific and observable enough to be measured. However, a learning outcome, okay, so if you think about the learning goal as like the roof, right? Or right here, and then the outcomes are the pillars, right? That hold that up. That's what the learning outcomes are. They're the things that help you support that goal. They're measurable, observable, and specific statements that clearly indicate what a student should know and be able to do as a result. And there's an art to writing learning outcomes. And it includes 4 main ingredients: action verbs, subject content, level of achievement, and then the condition of performance if applicable. And learning outcomes should have a measurement rubric associated with the objective. So that way you can say, this student was able to successfully do this at this level, and therefore this is where they are when it comes to mastery of this specific learning objective. And so I said, goals are very broad, objectives are narrow, they're measurable, they're observable. And so let's just talk a little bit more about the differences between those, because it's really important we understand this. Goals express what you want your students to be or have as a profile upon graduation, okay? So what types of students, what broad overall skills do you want them to have when they leave? Do you want them to be great critical thinkers or be able to work well in a global context or environment? Outcomes describe what you want the students to be able to do or make as evidence of achieving the outcome. And then outcomes are performance indicators of goals. To be accessible, outcomes must be written so they specify behaviors we can observe or results we can measure. And we're going to talk a lot more about how to ensure that your learning outcomes are measurable, so that way when we move on to direct and indirect measurements, you are measuring things that you can actually measure. It's very important. And I always like to start with Bloom's taxonomy. In higher education, the cognitive domain has been the principal focus of developing educational goals and outcomes. And the cognitive domain belongs to Bloom's taxonomy, which has stood the test of time and is being used by generations of curriculum planners and college and university professors, and has become the standard for developing frameworks of learning, teaching, and assessment. Bloom's original taxonomy in 1956 identified following levels of cognitive learning, arranged from lower level to higher levels of learning: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. However, this has changed. In 2001, a former student of Bloom's, Lorraine Anderson, and a group of cognitive psychologists, curriculum theorists, and instructional researchers and testing and assessment specialists published a revision of Bloom's taxonomy. The revision updates the taxonomy for the 21st century and includes significant changes in terminology and structure. In the revised framework, action words or verbs are used instead of the nouns that you saw over here. So we'll just flip back. So instead of these nouns, we've moved over to action verbs, which you can see over here, to label the 6 cognitive levels. 3 of the cognitive levels are renamed, and the top 2 higher order cognitive levels are interchanged. The result is a more dynamic model for classifying intellectual processes used by learners in acquiring and using knowledge. So the revised taxonomy identifies the following new levels of cognitive learning, arranged from lower order to higher order levels of learning. And this is important because as a student progresses through their higher education journey, they're going to progress through from lower levels of learning to higher order levels of learning. So maybe in their first couple years of college, they're going to be in that remembering, understanding stage, moving into applying, analyzing. And as they reach graduate and their doctoral programs, it's going to be very heavy in evaluating and creating. So, and remembering is just retrieving information, understanding is being able to summarize, infer, interpret, applying is using, implementing, um, analyzing is organizing, structuring, outlining, integrating, evaluating is hypothesizing, judging, checking, critiquing, and creating is designing, constructing, inventing, and so on. Now, this is important what verbs we choose because I talked about how there's kind of 4 main ingredients for writing your learning objectives, and a verb is probably the most important one. And that's because depending on the verb that we choose, we get to determine how easy or hard it is to measure. So you'll see here in this table, we have verbs that are hard to measure, ones that are still hard to measure, and ones that are relatively easy to measure. If you take a look, maybe appreciate the benefits of exercise. That would be really hard to measure how much a student appreciates something or how much a student has confidence in something, right? But and it's still hard to measure the next column, which is how if students are able to value or recognize or understand or identify. But it's more possible through like an integrated knowledge or a retained knowledge assessment. You might be able to measure understand or measure identify, but it's really easy because you can directly see it if the student can explain, evaluate, or demonstrate. If we can see the student doing the thing, that's really easy to measure. So when you're writing your learning outcomes, it's just really important that you think about those verbs and you use the verbs that are going to be observable and easy to measure. Okay, now getting into the good part, the direct and indirect measures. So student learning can be measured using several methods. The methods are commonly grouped into 2 categories, direct and indirect measures. Best practices recommend the use of both when determining the degree of student learning that has taken place. And what you'll often find is that with direct and indirect measures, that you'll see that you are able to explain what you find in a direct measure by what you find in an indirect measure. So they complement each other. And I'm going to dig into a little bit more about the individual characteristics of each of those and why that happens. So let's start with direct measures of student learning. So direct measures of student learning are program level direct measures that measure retained knowledge, or sometimes we call it integrated knowledge and skills expected at the end of a program of study. It is a direct measurement. Outcomes are written to capture expected results of student retained knowledge. Generally, the measures are standalone. They can be embedded into a module or a class, and direct measurement results are generally used to support continuous improvement at the institution. These measures are as objective as you can get, right? You're being as objective as possible. So maybe this is at the end of a program, you offer a multiple choice post assessment, right? To measure their retained knowledge throughout the entire program. Those results from that are a direct measure. Now, when directly assessing your students, there's a couple best practices. You need clearly articulated statements of expected student learning outcomes. I can't stress this one enough. I'll say it over and over again. You'll hear it, but it's because it's very important. A systematic, well-documented assessment process. You have to make sure you're assessing students the same way and that you're doing and you're documenting it. So that way, if you make changes and you're seeing changes to your outcomes or you're seeing changes to your scores, that maybe you can look through how you have changed anything through that documentation and attribute it to the reason why. When the pandemic happened last year, a lot of schools saw changes in their test scores because of the pandemic, and it was really interesting to see how their assessments were impacted, right? The results of their assessments. And it was really easy at that time to attribute it to, well, we just went through a pandemic. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the change is small, and if you don't document it, you don't remember and you can't attribute it. Also, direct assessment, incentivizing the end of program assessments. So let's say Susie is going to take her exam. She's at the end of her program. Let's say it's her graduate program. So she's been working 6 years on her degree total, between undergraduate and graduate, and she has senioritis, right? She is done. And so the last thing she has to do is take this exam, and it has no bearing on whether she graduates or not. And at that point, she's just not going to give it her all, right? You can imagine that. So it's really important that we incentivize it, because then Susie's like, oh, well, this exam actually makes up 10% of my grade, right? And so it's just enough for me to care. And so she's going to work a little bit harder, and it's going to be better for you, because you're going to get a more accurate representation of how much your students know at the end of their programs. Another way of incentivizing those that I think is really cool is using intrinsic motivators. So an extrinsic motivator is an outside force, right? It's something that we don't want to fail, or we really want to get this reward, so we do the good thing. But sometimes we participate, and we're motivated to participate in activities because it provides us some fulfillment within, such as I really like to bake, right? Because I just like to bake. It's fun for me. So how do you do that with an exam? I think that imparting on your students that this exam that they're taking, trying their best, doing their best on it, fully participating in it, is going to have a really good impact, or a really positive impact, on every student that comes through that program and through those doors after them. Because your school does make changes. Your school is going to look at how those students perform on this exam and make changes to your program to improve the student experience over and over again. And just by taking this exam, they are improving the quality of education at your institution. That won't work for all students, but some students that have this, that care about actually making a change, will participate even more fully in their exam at the end of their program. Also, assessment results must provide convincing evidence that students are achieving learning outcomes. So you want to make sure that you're using a really good test bank. Assessment results are used to inform decision making and program development. That is so important, especially if you're trying to sell that to students. You have to make sure that you're making things happen after you collect that. All right. So I hope everybody has a good understanding of direct measures or direct assessment. So we're directly measuring what they know, right? Now let's talk about indirect. And indirect was more commonly used until recently. A lot of us are very familiar with indirect assessment, and indirect measures provide a view of student learning, but not necessarily an objective view. It's very subjective. It measures their attitudes, perceptions, feelings, values. So if we have students at the end of a program take a survey saying, how much do you think you learned about this particular topic or subject? It is subjective, and the students are going to answer that as from their own subjective experience, right? I think I learned a lot. I don't think I learned very much. And you could actually see something very different in a direct assessment. We actually see that a lot. Students who excel in a certain area will actually minimize their competency in an area, and students without expertise in an area, who have not mastered the area or have limited knowledge, will inflate their competence in that area. Which is interesting. Indirect measures also imply student learning by employing self-reported data and reports. They help to substantiate instances of student learning. Indirect measures include surveys, interviews, course evaluations, and reports on retention, graduation, and placement. For a long time, we have been very interested in retention, graduation, and placements. And those are good measures of student success, but they don't tell us that students are prepared to join the workforce, right? They tell us students were able to make it through our program, but are they at the end of that program after they graduate ready to join the workforce? And then placement is a good indicator that they were able to be placed into the workforce, but then there is other measures that we must utilize and rest upon in order to know if students have the skills that they need. And then these measures are commonly used in conjunction with direct measures of student learning. So you need both. Just like I talked about, students will often inflate, how much they know about a particular subject when they don't know very much, and then the reverse when they do know a lot. We need direct measures of student learning so that we can get an accurate picture of what our students know when they're moving on and joining the workforce. So let's talk about best practices in indirect assessments. So here's a couple ideas for you, and I hope this is helpful. But if you design the online survey to be short, less than 10 questions, that clearly provide the information you need, that's going to be best. If you make an indirect assessment more than 10 questions, they're just going to do it. Do you remember, you remember taking surveys at the end of each class, right? On how you liked that class. And it was really only the instructors or professors that you really liked or you really did not like that you did it for. And you're probably checking out after 10 questions. So just keeping it short, keeping it sweet, and getting exactly what we need is very important so that students fill it out all the way, and not just for those that they really like and those they really dislike. Also, or when they have a strong feeling at all. To increase the response rate, add the survey to your direct programmatic assessment that occurs at the end of the academic program. So if you are providing a summative assessment, right, that covers the entire curriculum of your program at the end, add the survey to it, and the students will take that right before they start their exam. And then you are guaranteed to capture 100% of the students who are required to take that exam at the end of their program. And a 100% response rate is really cool, because I know that in higher education we're excited when we even get 5%, so 100% is exceptional. Utilize a third party. Surveys conducted by a third party yield more honest and accurate responses from students. So if students don't feel like they're responding exactly to you, they're more likely to be honest. And then incentivize student surveys. You could do this by considering a prize or drawing for a prize. At the institution I worked at, I didn't mention this, but I spent about 8 years in education. About 7 of that in higher education. We did a student survey for the entire institution every year. And of course, to raise the rates of response, we included a prize, and students seemed to like that. So we did it every year because it was effective. All right. So, what should you be asking on an indirect assessment? I also think this is important because we talked about keeping it short. We want to get the data we need so that we can make actionable change. So, first, using a Likert skill, you're going to want to ask things like, were courses offered frequently enough for timely completion of a degree? Were the courses taught well? Was the program of study challenging or stimulating? Did the student understand the application of learning objectives? Was the curriculum relevant to their academic or professional needs? Were they adequately prepared to satisfactorily complete the course? Did they meet with their advisor? Those are the types of questions you're going to want to ask using a Likert scale. There's a lot like to use the 5-point Likert scale. I prefer the 4 points because you can either be on one end or the other, right? You could either slightly disagree or strongly disagree. There's no like, I feel okay about it, right? But you can use either method. And then open-ended. Now, for open-ended questions, I will tell you this, especially if you have a large institution, it takes a lot more time to process the results from an open-ended assessment or a survey. It takes so much more time because you're going to have to record all of those and you're going to have to analyze all of those. With a Likert scale, you're able to plot your data and make some assumptions from that fairly quickly. But with open-ended, it just takes so much more time. So the questions you might ask though in an open-ended survey or assessment that could be useful are, what did they like best about their academic experience? What they what did they like least about their academic experience, and what would they change about their academic experience? Especially that last question, could be very helpful if your institution's willing to dig into those answers. Because even though the Likert scale is easier to plot out and analyze the data, you're really getting a richer look into how the students feel and how it could be better with the open-ended questions. Now, a lot of people, most of you probably already know, but we still get the question as to why do final grades not work for measuring program outcomes? And this is why. So here we have a marketing course, and we have 4 different things that are graded, and you'll see student 1 and student 2. So exams are a direct measure of their knowledge, right? And you can see student 1 scored a 75 and student 2 scored a 90. And then a presentation, maybe they're doing the presentation on the same subject matter, but they have, you know, one feels much more comfortable speaking in public than the other one does. The paper, you know, they write it on different subjects. They have a different level of academic writing ability. And then participation, right? Participation is actually not a measure of how much the students know. It's just a measure of how much they showed up. And so, but they have the same final grade, right? And their retained knowledge is vastly different, 75 versus 90 on those exams, but their grade is the same. And that's why we can't use grades. We can't use the accumulation of all of their grades within a course to say this is how much information our students are retaining.
Thanks, Desiree. So now, what do you do with the data? So Desiree showed you how to collect the data, but now what do we do with that? How do we analyze the data, share the results, and make changes? So if we dig into it a little bit deeper, what it means to look at the data, Peregrine Global Services actually provides higher education institutes programmatic assessments that include a variety of reports. We have over a dozen reports that you can slice and dice multiple different ways to get different outcomes. And they all report back to the continuous improvement activities that we've talked about. In this particular example, we have an outbound score that shows the reference of the post-test. So our outbound score is the post-test at the end of the program. And it's showing how your institution compares to the aggregate pool, which in this case, we picked outside the US. So you can see that you are the blue in this example, and the aggregate pool is the orange. And so you can see that you have done significantly well in some areas and slightly well above the aggregate pool in others. So this allows you to compare that. But then there's also other ways that we can compare that, or other ways that you should be, is also looking at it over a time period. So here we have the longitudinal report. So this allows you to compare over different times, and the lines are still providing you that aggregate information, but it allows you to compare over time. So as you make changes in your program, you can see, was that a positive effect or a negative effect in the program? And so you have those different benchmarking. So it's important that you keep track of the changes that you make as well over time, which we'll get into that a little bit more as well. And then another way that we can help is by obtaining that indirect measure for your students' learning is through our student exit survey, which Desiree talked about a little bit. And the best part about this is we can add it to the beginning of your exam. So you will get that 100% participation because the students have to take it before they can complete that exit exam. And kind of as Desiree talked about, we design and develop that exit survey based off of your learning outcomes. So we also have a report that will allow you to measure and see those results. Now, I think this is an important thing. How do you share the results? As you can see here, we have listed several different best practices we have seen over the years. These reports should be shared across the institution, from faculty to program chairs, all the way up to presidents and provosts. The more people who see your data, the better, in my opinion. The reports should highlight both the areas where there is room for improvement, but also be highlighting the areas of success. When presenting the reports, you should provide recommendations on how you're going to improve the students' learning within the program. And don't forget to provide a variety of reports to include both the historical and current data trends featuring both the negative and positive trends. Also feature any outside factors that may have affected your results, such as budget, faculty qualifications, etc. So you want to be able to provide a whole picture when you're sharing those results. And again, it's very important that you also provide solutions and how and what you're going to do to change the results. So now, what do you do with the data? How do you make changes needed to either continue positive trends or to improve the areas that are struggling? One thing that I want you to keep in mind when making changes is to make sure that you document the changes as you go along, because not all changes will make a positive impact. So you want to be able to go back and look at that and see, okay, well, that change, yeah, we went down, and then we can pivot from there. So I think it's very important that you document, so that you know exactly what the change was and if it was a positive or a negative impact on the program. So once you make the changes, you need to make sure you follow up with those changes and see if they work the way you wanted them to be successful. This is not something you can do once and forget it. You need to continuously look back at your data points results on a regular basis. Another thing to always remember is that if you have an area where your students are excelling, go back to that area, study it, and see if you can find a trend or a pinpoint why your students are excelling in that particular subject, and then try to duplicate that in areas that they're of weakness. So see if you can't draw some kind of correlation to why what you're doing in those positive areas versus not doing in those weaker areas. So we have our learning outcomes. We have how we're going to measure them, and we have our next step is continuing the continuous improvement process. However, as you can see here, it is not linear. We are not going to run this race, get all our data, collect it, analyze it, report it, make changes, cross the finish line. We got a medal. We received accreditation, and then it ends. That's not how it works. And this graphic shows it perfectly. It is a continuous loop, a continuous process to make sure that you are always making sure that you are assuring the best of learning.
Thank you, Kayla, so much. I like that analogy. It's not just crossing the finish line and getting a medal. It's constant, right? It's a process. It's not a line in the sand that we just draw and we're done. I really like your analogy. So now we've talked a little bit, we've inferred that Peregrine provides you with some solutions that help with assessment, right? We've talked about our assessment, we have a knowledge-based assessment, or that you could put the student survey in your assessment. So we want to tell you a little bit about that, but I'm going to start by telling you just about who Peregrine is. Peregrine is an education, technology, and a leadership development company. We very much believe in impacting the quality of education and developing values-based leaders all around the world. And we do have a global reach, both whether we are doing leadership development or impacting quality of education by providing our solutions to our thought partners. So we have an office in Tokyo. We have an office in Paris, several throughout the United States, and we serve pretty much every part of the globe. There's very few countries that we don't have a presence in. Now, we have served over 1 million students, or at least we've had over 1 million unique online assessments completed since we started Peregrine Global Services and started serving higher education about 10 years ago, and we're almost to 2 million. I'm really excited to switch out that 1 for a 2. It will be any day now, or this year maybe, right, Kayla? Maybe this year?
It should be, yeah.
It should be this year. So that will happen. And so we have been doing this for a while. We've been serving a lot of students. We've learned a lot of lessons along the way. And just like we're talking to you about continuous improvement, we're a company that is really invested in our continuous improvement. And we do say we're thought partners, and we actually mean that, because we're constantly collaborating with all of our higher education institutions to serve them to the best of our ability. And the solutions that we provide specifically include assessments and instructional modules. So we have two different kinds of assessments. We have knowledge-based or integrated knowledge assessments that directly measure the knowledge obtained during an academic program. And then we have soft skills, or sometimes they're called professional skills or sometimes workplace skills, but those skills like critical thinking and teamwork and communication, we have an assessment for that, which we believe is one of the most objective assessments on the market today and is really cool and works well for higher education. And then we have instructional modules, and we'll go into more depth about those, but they're really instructional content that you can plug into a course. It's plug and play, right? You can plug it into a course, enhance the student experience, and develop the competencies on a cross-disciplinary level. And like I said, we'll discuss that more. I get excited talking about our solutions. So
absolutely. As Desiree mentioned, we have several different solutions, and one of them is our programmatic assessment exam. So this solution allows you to customize the assessment to your learning outcomes. So if you can look at our test bank topics, and if you don't teach on a certain topic, then you're not going to assess it. We're not going to put it in your exam. There's no reason. We understand that not every school, every program has the same learning outcomes and the same topics that are important to them. So we are 100% customizable to your school, to your program, to your institution. And we also provide a wide variety of reporting that allows you to analyze the data to make sure that you are improving that and have that quality assurance of your learning outcomes that are required. Our solutions and assessment is offered 100% online. So we have many features in place to make sure that the platform is secure, such as the questions are timed so that students can't spend a lot of time on each question. You can't copy and paste the questions into another browser. If you leave the browser, the screen goes blank and a little thing pops up saying we're watching you, kind of. We track that and provide that in a report if students are leaving the screen or doing anything like that. We also track IP addresses. So where students are taking the exam, and if we see all of a sudden we have 5 students taking the exam in Tokyo, then we may contact you and be like, do you really have students in Tokyo? Yeah, we do. Perfect. If not, okay, we can investigate that, pinpointed it to exactly what student took it. And those are just some of the few things that we have, and we are adapting and making even more changes as technology grows to make sure that those remain secure. We offer the assessment solution in 8 different disciplines. So we have it in the early childhood, public administration, general education, accounting and finance, criminal justice, business administration, healthcare management, and then we also have workplace soft skills. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that here directly. This solution allows you to align directly with your learning outcomes. We can integrate directly into your LMS. We have both undergrad and graduate test banks. We are addressing your accreditation requirements, both the individual and programmatic reports. They can be sliced and diced a multiple of different ways. I'm not joking when I say we can add cohorts, so you can compare your online students to your on-campus students. You can compare your accounting majors to your marketing majors. We can slice and dice that data as many ways as you want. And then we also provide that capability to compare that against benchmarks, compare your scores with like institutions. And like I mentioned before, they are secure and we have security measures in place.
Okay, so on to our learning modules. So modules come in a variety of forms. We have simulations, micro case studies, dynamic lessons comprising of informative text, video, sound clips, activities, and quizzes. They use multimedia and all kinds of other activities to reinforce concepts over and over again. The learning is truly scaffold throughout these modules, which is really neat and supports a universal design when we're thinking about making learning accessible to all types of learners. these modules do exactly that. You can pick and choose the solutions, the modules that work best for your classroom, and then all modules are easily integrated into your learning management system. Modules are used to support a variety of different needs. So for example, we provide academic leveling, and that just refers to modules that provide instruction for students who were not an undergraduate business major and are going into graduate business schools and may need to grow or develop their foundational business knowledge in order to be successful in their graduate program. Right in sight, it's an academic writing readiness module, and it develops students' knowledge of plagiarism, how to cite their sources, how to write formally for an academic setting, word choice, and so much more, so that students are prepared for your classroom, as well as modules that you can use in order to deliver the concepts that are and curriculum that are important within your particular class. And most of our modules are cross-disciplinary and very much focused on competency development. The National Association of Colleges and Employers identified these 8 competencies as the most important to success in work and life after our students graduate. And they include career and self-development, communication, critical thinking, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. So all of our modules are created with the thought of ensuring that we're giving schools the tools to build those competencies within their graduates, and develop those within their graduates. And they're organized by these different competencies. So you can definitely visit our website, or we can work with you to look at what we have available in our portfolio.
Yes, we have lots of options that we can help you with in those portfolios. But another one that I want to highlight a little bit about is our 360 evaluation that we call EvaluSkills. So EvaluSkills allows you to directly measure proficiency levels of essential workplace competencies. It allows you to receive that feedback directly from individuals around you, such as your peers, superiors, mentors, colleagues, to get a true, accurate feedback of how your skills are perceived from those around you. The participant also assesses themselves just as their colleagues do. So then you can compare that as well to see if what you believe is true of yourself is actually what the people around you believe and perceive.
And that's great, Kayla. I think that it has been such a struggle for higher education to measure soft skills and in an objective manner. So I just think this this resource is phenomenal.
Absolutely. And so how EvaluSkills works is that you select from a wide variety of skills that you would like to be assessed, and then the individuals send them to their evaluators. And then their evaluators are provided a skill, kind of like you can see here, we have a snapshot of it, and a rubric, so that then they can assess that. So each skill provides 5 sample statements, and then behaviors that correspond using a Likert type ranking system. The rubric helps provide objectivity to the evaluators. So kind of, as you can see, gives them some guidelines of how to do it versus disagree, agree, not agree. It kind of breaks that down and gives them some statements of that to make it a little bit more relevant, so that everybody's kind of grading it in the same way. And then we'll provide you both with a group and individual reports. So the reports will allow you to see the overall group strengths and weaknesses, providing you that information needed to continue the quality improvement program development. This also allows you to identify areas of improvement for individuals who may need a little bit extra support in a certain area. So we give you both aspects of that through the group and individual. Here's a quick look at one of the sections in the participant report. So this report shows the participant how their self-score compare against the external evaluator scores that I talked about a couple seconds ago. And then it shows where the group is. So they can kind of see where they're at from what they perceive as themselves, what their evaluators see, and where their cohort is that they are in with that group. And this too is again offered online, can be accessed anywhere in a secure platform.
Thank you so much, Kayla. EvaluSkills is probably, when I first came onto Peregrine, I was really impressed with just the power of EvaluSkills and being able to measure those, because a lot of our learning outcomes are those soft skills that we can't directly measure through a knowledge-based assessment. So to see that we're serving higher education by giving them a tool to measure those skills was really neat to me. We want to.
Desiree, I'm going to stop you for just one quick question. We have, or one quick second. We have a question. So a few of you have asked if you can get a recording, and absolutely you can. I've messaged that, and we'll have a poll at the end asking you what you'd like for follow-up. But then we do have, does your module can be integrated in all LMS? For example, Canvas, Moodle, Brightspace, Blackboard, etc. To date, we have been able to integrate with everything, even homegrown systems. So absolutely your Canvas, Brightspace, Moodle, Blackboard, all of those, no questions asked. And so far we haven't not been able to integrate in any homegrown ones either. So the answer to that question is yes.
Thank you, Kayla. And we want to thank you for joining our webinar today and participating. Thank you so much. So we'd like to give you free access to our leadership styles module. It's just a short module where you can learn about the various leadership styles and kind of think about your own, reflect on your own, and how you use those in various situations. And to get that module, we just need you to answer a poll question. We want to know how you want us to help you next. Of course, we would be delighted to schedule a call to discuss the various options Peregrine provides, or maybe you have something specific in mind you would like us to work through with you, maybe a challenge that you would like to share with us, and maybe we do have a solution. And then we would also like to, if you would like to access our leadership styles module, Kayla's going to go ahead and launch the poll because she has the ability to do that, and just let us know. Now you can pick multiple. So if you want both, you can let us know, but we'll give you just a moment.
And we will follow up with an email that includes the recording.
Yes. And you should receive that within 24 hours. So you should receive an email with the recording, a copy of the slides, and any other documents or resources that we have that we think might be of value.
We'll give the poll just a couple more minutes. It looks like we're about 71% responded so far. Give it 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Kayla. And we will reach out. So this is the last screen. If you have questions and you want to reach out to me before I reach out to you, beat me to the punch, you can contact me at more@desireeglobal.com. And you can also visit our website to learn more about all that we provide and just, you know, the ins and outs of it. We gave you a very 10,000-foot view. So if you want to get into the nitty gritty, we have lots of information on our website, peregrineglobal.com. Feel free to explore that. And anything else to add, Kayla? Ending thoughts?
I don't think so, unless we have any questions.
Just give them a moment.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate your time. We know it's valuable. All right. Well, I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their week, and we will be in touch. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out.
Perfect. Thank you, Kayla.
Bye.